Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. Episode number 18. Simon Head, Chamatkar Sandhu, fighting talk from the UK. Distinctly British flavour. You know the drill. You've been with us a few weeks, hopefully. If you're new, by the way, thank you very much. Let us know how you found the show, and you can tweet us at the Brit Pack MMA. Let us know how you found the show. We talk MMA here. We talk MMA. We talk the big stories in MMA, and boy, have we got some big stories to talk about. On this week's show, Conor McGregor has been stripped of his UFC featherweight title, or he's relinquished his UFC featherweight title. We will discuss that on this week's show. There are various knock-on issues from this. Jose Aldo is now the undisputed, we'll put that in quote marks, UFC featherweight champion, and Max Holloway and Anthony Showtime Pettis will now compete for the interim UFC featherweight title. That all happened, all of this is the fault of Daniel Cormier. We have to call out DC on this. If Daniel Cormier hadn't have pulled his groin, none of this need have happened. But there we go, the light heavyweight champion goes and injures his groin, and it's like the butterfly effect. You know, a butterfly on one side of the globe can flap his wings, and it can cause an earthquake on the other side of the planet. Daniel Cormier pulls his groin and the featherweight division completely goes into chaos. It's bizarre. We will talk about all of that on this week's show. We'll also look back at UFC Fight Night in Melbourne, Australia, where the Reaper, Robert Whittaker, produced the goods in one of the craziest rounds of action we've seen in MMA in 2016, beating Derek Brunson. We'll also talk about the upcoming TUF finale and the next challenge facing Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. And of course, we will answer your questions on this week's show. As I said, my name is Simon Head, and on the other end of the Skype line is my good buddy Mr. Chamatkar Sandhu. Sandhu, I was worried about 3-4 days ago how much material we'd have for this show. We got no worries this week.
None whatsoever. Leave it to Conor McGregor, the featherweight division of the UFC, to give us a hot button topic to discuss and debate and dissect. And it's perfect timing because we're finally back to our old setting, you know, after a few weeks of being on the road together, which has been quite fun. We were in New York for UFC 205, then we were in Belfast for that fight night card, and we were able to kind of give the fans and give our audience a little bit of a different take and a different show. But we're back now, we're back home. That's us done for being on the road for 2016. So this is going to be our usual format moving forwards, but we do have a few special surprises planned over the course of the next couple of weeks, and we'll tease that a little bit later on in the show. But look out for some exciting announcements from the show moving forwards. But I guess let's not waste any more time, Si. We've got a big show today. It's I think for both you and me, this news story has 100% divided opinion. Of course, we're talking about Conor McGregor being stripped of the UFC featherweight championship. I guess maybe just to throw it to you first, do you want to just let our listeners and viewers just go through the facts as we know them, the timeline, what happened over the course of this past weekend, where we currently stand? And then I guess we can just go into the minutiae and the nitty-gritty of the fallout from this breaking hot story news.
Absolutely. It's as I mentioned in the intro there, it all stemmed from Daniel Cormier, which is kind of bizarre. The light heavyweight champion of the world in any way has any kind of effect on the featherweight division, but that bizarrely is what's happened. So obviously we know what happened at UFC 205. Conor McGregor made UFC history, the first man to hold two world titles in different weight classes at the same time. Never been done before. We've had two weight world champions before, never held the belts at the same time. Conor McGregor is the first. That means he's in the record books for the rest of eternity in terms of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. You can only ever be the first once. So people can match it, but they can never beat him to being the first guy. So he's in the history books. Featherweight champion, which he won back in December last year. He knocked out Jose Aldo at UFC 194, 13 seconds. That was unlucky for Jose. Then in November this year, Madison Square Garden, 1.5 rounds, 8 minutes, 5 knockdowns, 2 world championship belts for Conor McGregor. Amazing performance. We were both there to see it. Very, very special night. Everything was looking good. Now, going into that weekend, there was talk about, is he going to be asked or forced to let go of one of his belts? And there was never really a definitive sort of plan for what was going to happen. Dana said it was going to happen and that he was going to have to let go of one of the belts. Conor never actually said he was ever actually going to let go of one of the belts. At one point, the quote I believe he said was, "It's going to take a fucking army to get one of these belts off me." Well, that army took all of 2 weeks because he now only has one belt. So basically what's happened, and I'll give it to you in some sort of order. First thing, earlier this weekend, we found out that Daniel Cormier, the UFC light heavyweight champion, was out of the main event of UFC 206 on December the 10th in Toronto, Canada. A torn adductor muscle in his groin has ruled him out. He put it out on Twitter. He apologised to Anthony Rumble Johnson, who was very gracious in accepting that apology. All very respectful. Everything's fine. The big problem then is this incredibly injury hit and ever-changing fight card for Canada now doesn't have a main event. It also doesn't have a world championship fight. So the UFC have got a problem at this point. So what then happened was an interesting chain of events, starting with Conor McGregor. It was announced during the UFC Fight Night event in Melbourne, Australia. John Anik and Dan Hardy, camera cut to them at Octagon side. John Anik officially confirmed that Conor McGregor had, quotes, relinquished his UFC featherweight championship belt. They also then went on to confirm that the new main event of UFC 206 would be what was the co-main event, Max Holloway versus Anthony Showtime Pettis, and that fight had also been promoted not just to the main event, but to an interim featherweight title fight. Interim because the previous interim championship holder, hope you're all taking notes, you will be tested in a minute, Jose Aldo has now been promoted to the full champion once again. And again, I use quotation marks. He is now the undisputed, or perhaps we should say hotly disputed, UFC featherweight champion of the world. So that's where we are. Conor McGregor is no longer a featherweight world champion. He, of course, is the lightweight world champion. Jose Aldo is now the featherweight champion of the world. Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis will fight for the interim belt. The winner of that will then fight Jose Aldo in 2017, probably first quarter of 2017. That's what we have, Sandhu, as it stands. It's a remarkable chain of events, and it has absolutely lit up social media with fans, journalists, pundits, fighters. Everyone's been putting their 2 cents worth in, and it seems like everybody seems to have a slightly different view on things. Now, we could just launch into this and just talk about the thing as a whole, but there's so many different minutiae and strands to this. Let's talk about the number one thing first. Let's talk about the undisputed featherweight championship of the world, and let's talk about Conor McGregor. Your opinion, the UFC either stripped him or they made him relinquish it. Either or, it's basically the same thing. He doesn't have the belt anymore. Were they right or not? Should he still have that belt or shouldn't he?
It depends on timing, Simon. It all depends on timing. Had the UFC, in the days after 205, sat down with Conor McGregor and said, hey, look, you've said that you're not going to be fighting for a while. Your girlfriend's pregnant. You're going to take some time out. We're approaching almost a year since the featherweight championship was last, the official featherweight championship was last contested for, which was obviously UFC 194 last December. We need to do something. The featherweight division needs to move forward. Are you going to fight at featherweight next? Is that what you want? And are you able to fight within the next 6 months? Now, if his answer at that point had been no, then I think the UFC would have been well within their rights at that moment in time to say, right, okay, we understand where you are with that. You're going to keep the 155 championship because you've just won it, right? So we've got some time to kind of get your next fight lined up in the lightweight division, but we've got to take the belt off you. And at that point, they could have maybe done a press conference or a conference call, something similar to what Dana White and George St. Pierre did when he kind of went into semi-retirement with the welterweight championship. Again, had they done that in just the 24 to 48 hours following UFC 205, no problem with that whatsoever. It's the timing of this and the circumstances of how they've taken the championship away from him that leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. And I think before we kind of, again, go into more detail in the various segments of this story, we spoke about it a little bit off air, Simon, and I think it's good to kind of air this on the show. There is no right or wrong answer with regards to how anyone feels about this. It's really open to interpretation. We know everybody in our MMA bubble is very passionate, especially the hardcores. You have a point of view, but the thing is, it's just how you absorb this, how you feel about things. If you can sleep well at night with Jose Aldo as the UFC featherweight champion, God bless you, no problem at all. But there's a fair portion of the community that won't be sleeping well, with that on their minds. Now, going back to the timing, had they done that, even a few days ago, prior to Daniel Cormier's injury, okay, fine, you've sat down with Conor McGregor, then great, no problem at all. The fact that Conor McGregor, even up until now, it's been, as of time of this show's recording, it's coming up to 48 hours since the news was broken during the Melbourne broadcast. He hasn't tweeted. He hasn't given any quick-witted remark or comment. This is serious. He hasn't given any kind of jibe about how preposterous this whole situation is. You can tell instantly that this is a serious situation. I'm sure he's upset about it, and the fact that a bigger deal wasn't made out of it. I mean, at the end of the day, the title, the UFC Championship, that is the Mount Everest in this sport, or that's the way it should be, and that's the way it's been portrayed for many, many years. And for it to be just been stripped away from Conor McGregor and then slapped around the waist of Jose Aldo and been presented as the official UFC featherweight championship, it just doesn't sit well with me. And to his credit, Jose Aldo, like McGregor, hasn't really made any comments or remarks about becoming all of a sudden the king of the featherweight division. So for me, Simon, it would have been the right move for the UFC to do this. From their point of view, it's just the timing was a complete blunder.
Yeah. I agree on the timing thing. I think the thing that leaves me a little, and I'm gonna probably come across as very contradictory in some of the things I say in this show, so I'll warn you in advance. Basically, if I sort of take myself completely out of it and step back as far as I can, I think in the long run, what happened here was probably for the best. Now, the way that they're getting to that point is a little bit it's not ideal. But I don't think there's a perfect way to do it. To be honest, I think the issue that they have here, it strikes me that this whole thing stems. You can basically bring it down to two words: damage limitation. I think they're trying to protect UFC 206. I don't think they want to cancel UFC 206. They can't get another world title fight for UFC 206. They've lost their world champion at relatively short notice. I mean, what's the date today? 28th of November as we're recording. And we've got the situation there with no world championship fight coming up. And without a world championship fight on a pay-per-view, we've got a problem, because it's going to be hard. It's going to be a tough sell for a pay-per-view anyway, because the cards changed so much. But what you've got now is one with no world championship fight. So what they've basically done is they've basically, like a monkey puzzle, they've moved everything around, and it's now working. It's now working where they've got a belt on top of the card. The people who know what's what know that belt is worth precisely nothing. In terms of to the fighters, it's worth potentially a few bucks on the pay-per-view, because people who impulse buy pay-per-views will think, okay, who's fighting? Max Holloway v Anthony Pettis. Is that a title fight? It's an interim title fight. Oh, I'll get it then. Now the hardcore fans who watch every event, they know what's going on here, and they'll buy it based on how they feel. But it's those impulse purchasers that doing this might just get those extra few bucks in. So I think that's what it all stems down to. In terms of McGregor having to give up or relinquish his belt, in isolation, I don't have a problem with that. I also would argue against most of the arguments for him doing it, which makes no sense. But I'll explain. He hasn't defended his belt for a year. Now that, from most people, would be a criticism of Conor. He hasn't defended his belt for a year, take the belt off him. I would say he hasn't defended his belt for the year, so it makes sense for him to relinquish the belt. But I don't see that as a criticism, because his career path has taken a detour that should have lasted one fight before he knew where he was going. Instead, it lasted 3 fights and about 10 months, because he was going to fight Dos Anjos. And if he'd have fought Dos Anjos, I wrote a piece for The Sun today, and I broke it all down, and my verdict was, and it was a bit of a joke, blame Rafael Dos Anjos, because if he hadn't hurt his foot, then none of this would have happened, right? We'd have known in March at UFC 197, who was it, 197, 196, who, whether McGregor would have been the lightweight world champion or not. If he hadn't, then if he'd have been beaten badly by Dos Anjos, maybe he'd have gone back to 145 and he'd have had a defence or two by now. But because Dos Anjos got injured and he fought Diaz in a non-title fight and lost, he then had a problem. Does he go down again? And then he gets slammed for sort of walking away with his tail between his legs, going back down to featherweight? Or does he go again and try and get it back? His professional pride put him in there again. He did it again and he won, which then set him up for the title fight he wanted in the first place, which he won. So his mission took a little bit of a detour, took a bit of a scenic route, but he got where he wanted to go. He got the lightweight belt. And the important thing now is that the reset button needs to be hit on both the lightweight division and the featherweight division. Lightweight division has been fine, but now Conor's in at the top. It shouldn't change. He should have to now defend his belt against the best lightweights in the world, because that's what champions do. And in terms of featherweight, if he's going to stay at lightweight, then he needs to let that featherweight belt go. The way it's come about has been very messy. It's not been great. It's not a great look for the UFC. It's a shame on Conor McGregor. I think, like you said, I think for him to be able to be the man letting go of the belt, I think the UFC could have afforded him the opportunity to do that. Maybe they did. We don't know. Maybe they spoke to him and said, look, we'd like you to do this. And he said, no. And then they've just gone and done this. So we don't know. We don't know what's gone on behind the scenes. But I think that would have been the nice way for it to happen, for McGregor to say, look, I'm at 155. Realistically, I'm not going to fight at 145 again. I'm going to go for 155 and maybe 170. I'm going to relinquish 145. I've beaten the best guy in that division. Best of luck to the rest of you. And then just went on his merry way. But it's a messy situation. I'm not pleased for Conor McGregor, because obviously he's had to give up half his titles, but I'm pleased that in probably 3 to 4 months' time, maybe 6 months, everything should be back on the level again. The featherweight championship should have one belt in it. Sorry, the featherweight division should have one belt in it. The lightweight division hopefully will have one belt in it by the middle of next year. And that's how it should be. You have one belt, an undisputed champion, none of this interim rubbish, and have an active champion defending his belt. And I think by the middle of next year, hopefully that's what we'll get. But right now, it's a mess. It's a mess.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things in there, and I think the first kind of segue I want to make now is UFC 206. Because as you mentioned, Cormier got injured. They had to promote Holloway and Pettis into that main event. Now, is slapping an interim title, onto that new main event going to bring in a couple of 100,000 buys? Probably not. I'm sure it'll have some impact. Is the impact of an extra 10, 15, 20,000 buys, just to say, is that justifiable in the long run to introduce an interim title? I mean, I think if you go back a few steps, had the UFC booked 206 properly, got the deal done with George St. Pierre in the first place, for example, right?
Bisping versus GSP. That fight was on the table.
Bisping, exactly. If they had just done that in the first place, we wouldn't even be worried about having to throw an interim title in there. The interim title between Holloway and Pettis has been created here just to fix a promotional issue they have with that particular card, and it's unfortunate. Now, having listened to both Pettis and Holloway, it does mean a little bump up in salary for them for this particular fight, because it is a title fight, and when you're in a title fight, you do get paid more. So well done to them. By no fault of their own, they're going to get more money for their, which is I'm really looking forward to that fight anyway. But going back to the championship in 6 months' time, Simon, it depends on who's holding the belt, right? So let's just try and kind of navigate at the potential routes. Now, if in 6 months' time you've got Max Holloway, who's won the interim title, he fights Jose Aldo in a unification bout, and Jose Aldo is the featherweight champion. I'm sorry, Mr. Conor McGregor knocked you out just 18 months ago in 13 seconds, and we all saw it happen. You might have that belt around your waist. Bruce Buffer might pronounce you as a reigning, defending, undisputed UFC featherweight champion, but we all know that the real champion is Conor McGregor, even though he might not be in your division anymore. It just puts an asterisk on your name. If Max Holloway beats Pettis, goes on to beat Aldo in that unification bout, Holloway, fantastic, 9-10 fights in a row. But I'm sorry, Conor McGregor can say, I've beaten you, son. I beat you a couple of years ago. You might claim to be the best 145er, but we know what's really happening here. I'm the best 145er. The only fighter in this kind of situation that can go all the way, beat Max Holloway to become the interim featherweight champion, go on to fight Jose Aldo in a unification bout, a fight that he was supposed to have with Jose Aldo a couple of years ago when he was the lightweight champion, is Anthony Pettis. Anthony Pettis can go all the way to become the true champion of the 145 pound division, have that belt over his shoulder,
the two-weight champion,
and also become a two-weight champion as well. I'll put that on his record, of absolutely 100%. But actually be able to then say, with that 145 belt over his shoulder, I'm the best 145-pound fighter in the world. And guess what, Conor McGregor? You haven't beaten me. You don't know what it's like to get in there with me. And then he's got this great promotional angle to try and build towards a Conor McGregor fight. But he's the only one that's actually got some cachet to be able to go all the way. Again, this is all open to interpretation, right? Like we spoke about earlier. I think Jose Aldo and Max Holloway are in a no-win situation when it comes with regards to the legacy of them fighting in the featherweight division and potentially holding the featherweight championship belt. I think it's just going to have a dark cloud over them until at some point they can eventually fight McGregor again. I actually said, if I'm a Jose Aldo, who again hasn't, it's crazy. He hasn't even tweeted. He's just become the featherweight champion once again. We haven't heard a peep out of him, right? The best thing he can do now to legitimize himself in the current state of affairs is to say, right, I'm the featherweight champion. I want that McGregor rematch. I want that McGregor rematch. You might be having this interim title fight between Pettis and Holloway, but sod that. I'm the champion. I'll be happy to wait 6 months until McGregor comes back down to 145, or I'll be happy to go to 155. Again, it's open to interpretation. I understand what you're saying with regards to hitting the reset button. The reset button only gets hit truly for me if Pettis can go all the way. With the other guys, I think it's still very much questionable in regards to how we as a community view the featherweight division and the true champion of that division as well.
This is where you and I start to differ in our opinions. So let me come back with you with a couple of things. I completely take everything you say, because if Aldo wins a title, yeah, that is what a lot of people are going to say. If Holloway ends up winning the title, yeah, that is what a lot of people are going to say. But why hasn't Jose Aldo fought Conor McGregor again? Why is that? Because McGregor basically opted for other fights. Jose has been shouting for a rematch for a year, hasn't got it. Holloway's been shouting for a fight with McGregor for a year, hasn't got it. When Conor McGregor got beat, submitted by Nate Diaz, what did he do? He called for a rematch. And you know what? He got it like that. Straight away. And then he had his opportunity to get it back, which all credit and kudos to him. he got. And the difference here between Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor is Conor McGregor got what he wanted. Jose Aldo did not get what he wanted. So I get what you say, but there is a very, very good reason why people are able to say that, because he's never been given that opportunity. Now, if he'd been given the opportunity and turned it down, then more for him. If he's been given that opportunity and took it and lost, then it's definitively decided. In terms of Max Holloway has evolved beyond all recognition from the guy who fought Conor McGregor, who himself has improved immeasurably as well. That's a fight I'd love to see one day. But I think Jose Aldo versus Conor, I think that only a fool would turn around and say that Jose Aldo, Conor McGregor 2 would end up going similarly to the first one. Because I don't think you can do that. I don't think that fight goes, it goes a fair bit longer than 13 seconds next time round. Conor might knock him out again, but I can also see Aldo outpointing him as well. I think it's a much closer fight than the first result would suggest. But again, now we're in the realm of opinion at this point. But what I'm saying is, and the number one thing is, you look at Jose Aldo's record. He's lost one fight in 11 years. His last 11 years, he's lost one fight. That was in 13 seconds to Conor McGregor at UFC 194. But if Conor McGregor is no longer operating at featherweight, he has no claim on that division whatsoever. If he hasn't fought in that division for a year, if the decision has been made that he doesn't want to fight in that division or he isn't going to fight in that division, then he has no claim over the division anymore. So Jose Aldo can say, yeah, I am the undisputed champion because of all the guys who are fighting and prepared to cut to 145, I'm the best. And yeah, I everything you said absolutely is what a lot of people will say. But what I would say to counter that is the only true test, and this is the great thing about fight sports, there's only one way of settling all of this, and that's for the two guys to get in there and fight again. And it doesn't make good business sense for Conor McGregor to do that at this point. If Aldo goes and wins the featherweight championship, Aldo could potentially end up becoming a possibility at 155. But I think once McGregor is no longer a factor at 145, then the argument of what happened in the past is purely that. It's historical. Doesn't really affect what's happening right now.
And that's kind of the issue where we're at the moment, Simon, is because of the way the UFC handled this entire situation.
Correct.
Because they never sat down with Conor McGregor, because we never got an official statement from Conor McGregor to say, hey, you know what? The cut is too much for me. I'm going to focus my efforts on 155 pounds. I had a good run at 145, but I'm getting up there in age. The cut's just too much for me. Because we haven't heard from him, right? We don't know if he was ever intending to go back to 145 pounds.
We can say what he wants now, can't he?
Exactly, and they've lost the power to kind of have some sort of official statement to kind of still give credence to that 145 pound championship because of the way they handled things. Yep. Now, had Conor McGregor and the UFC again sat down together, hashed it out, he wants equity, whatever the situation is, and a part of the deal was to relinquish the 145 pound championship and do a press conference. No problem at all. Then obviously you can, like you said, reset the button, move forward, and things are all hunky dory with that weight class. But it's just the way they handle things. And again, going back to the whole idea of McGregor hasn't fought in 145 pounds in a year. He hasn't defended his championship belt. Well, you answered the question for me earlier on, Si, is because it was meant to be a very short detour to 155 pounds against Rafael dos Anjos, and this detour with the Diaz brothers and the Nate Diaz fight caused everything to be elongated. Yeah. And why is that? Because it broke pay-per-view records. It was the biggest money fight the UFC could put together. And yeah, if McGregor wanted a rematch with Nate Diaz, you'd think that Lorenzo Fitti and Dana White at that particular moment in time, who are still running things at the UFC, were going to say no to that when they saw the pay-per-view numbers being I don't think so, right? So now going back to Jose Aldo and these featherweights, they're in a tough spot now. They're in a very, very tough spot because they might be Jose Aldo right now might be, paraded around by the UFC, marketing and advertising and promotional department as the 145-pound champion. How do you think he feels? Do you think he sleeps well at night? What do you think he's reading on his Twitter timeline? And, you think, his friends and family and colleagues and teammates at Novian now are saying, yeah, he's the best 145-pound fighter in the world? I don't think so. I think he's too much, he's too proud to be able to say that to himself. And again, it'll be interesting to see when he finally does make a comment how he feels about this entire situation. But again, I mean, look, 9 times out of 10, 95 times out of 100, promotionally, the UFC tends to get it right.
Yeah.
Normally, they get it right on the money. With this situation, in terms of how and the timing, they just done an absolute blunder. I mean, that's the one word that keeps coming to mind. The way they've handled the situation has just left such a bitter and bad taste in everyone's mouth with regards to how they feel about Jose Aldo as the new champion, how they feel about this interim title fight between Holloway and Pettis. You don't need that interim title in that picture, really and truly. I mean, again, if you just said, listen, you know what? These two are fighting for the number one contendership to fight Aldo next. That would have been enough. And again, I get it what you said earlier on, Sai, about putting they seem to be obsessed by having a title fight, whether it's interim or real or not, in these pay-per-view cards. But I think the word interim and these interim titles are being more devalued as time goes on, because they literally are being created out of thin air just to fit the circumstance and to fit the scenario, which suits the UFC well. Really and truly, when an interim title should be brought into the equation is how it was brought into the equation for the UFC men's bantamweight division a few years ago. When Dominic Cruz was the 135-pound champion and he was injured and he couldn't come back and defend his championship belt for more than a year. And in fact, I think they gave him way longer than a year to try and come back anyway. During that time period, Renan Barão was the interim champion and he was defending that interim title too. And at one point in time, when Dominic Cruz was re-injured and he knew that he was going to be out for yet another year, they thought, right, enough's enough. We now have to make the interim title the official, legit bantamweight championship, because enough time had moved on, and Barão was a defending champion, and no one had a real problem with that, right? Everyone thought, right, okay, right now as things stand, Renan Barão is the best 135-pound fighter in the world, and when Cruz comes back, he'll get a shot at the championship, and in fact, he earned his way back to the title shot anyway, by having a fight with, was it Mizugaki? I think it was.
Sakayo Mizugaki, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's ways and there's scenarios where the interim title makes complete and perfect sense. And I see people bring the Daniel Cormier championship situation into this equation, or the GSP welterweight championship into the equation. Let's just talk about that for a second. When GSP gave up the title to go into semi-retirement, that was a completely different situation. He had been champion for such a long time. He had wiped out that division 2 or 3 times over, and for him it was, right, enough's enough. I'm going to go into into retirement, or he didn't really use that word, but he moved away, and that gave a chance for a new a set of fighters to contend for that championship. Then you can start to have the barbershop talk. Oh well, Tyron Woodley is a champion of today. How would he have fared against the champion of 5 years ago, GSP? That's barbershop talk. Daniel Cormier was the interim champion, became the legit champion because John Jones removed himself from competition because he got himself suspended. But the UFC were all in on making that unification fight happen. Their hands are tied right now. They can't make that John Jones Cormier fight happen. So they have to make Cormier the legit champion. Yep. In this situation, with the featherweight division, they've just cocked it all up. I mean, there's no other word I can think of. It's an absolute mess. It's a ridiculous situation. So yeah, I mean, that I need a break. Simon. Weigh in, break another segment down for me. Where are we headed to next in this debate, in this discussion?
Yeah, well, look, let me give you sort of a top line how I feel about this, because it's kind of weird. It's 1 minute it'll sound like I'm defending McGregor, and the next minute I'm actually railing against him. Let me put my colours on the mast right now. I have zero complaints, none whatsoever, with anything that Conor McGregor has done in terms of his career choices and the way he's gone about his business. He has been nothing short of a superstar. He has been an absolute dream for the UFC promotionally in terms of as a someone taking the sport to a new level. For the likes of you and me over here on this side of the pond, it's been brilliant for us. The outlet I work for, The Sun, we can't get enough Conor McGregor. You know, when I'm not writing a story about Conor McGregor within the sport, the guys in the office are writing about his new car, or they're writing about his iPhone case, or they're writing about this, or they're writing about that. And because there's an insatiable appetite for Conor McGregor. Why? He's a larger than life personality, but over that, he delivers on fight night. So, and I don't think, you know, he's been accused of ducking opponents. I don't agree with that. He's also been criticised for not defending his championship for a year. I wouldn't criticise him for that, because I think the career choices he's made in the circumstances he's found himself in are actually to be applauded. He could have pulled out of UFC 189 when Jose Aldo got injured. What did he do? He stayed loyal to the UFC and to the fans that had spent all their money to come over, buy hotels and plane tickets. He took on the one style of fighter that everyone at the time said he won't want to fight one of those. He's not going to do well against a strong, heavy-handed wrestler. He took on the strongest, most heavy-handed wrestler in the UFC featherweight division on 2 weeks' notice, and he stopped him after getting smashed in the first round. He came back. He stopped him in the second round to win the interim belt. Then he tried to get this fight. Well, he then eventually got the fight with Aldo, dusted him in 13 seconds. Everyone went nuts. Then history repeated itself. He was going to go for a world championship. He was going to fight a Brazilian. There was a big media build-up. Then what happened? Exactly the same again. Guy gets injured at very short notice. Rafael dos Anjos injures his foot. What does he do? Does he pull out and say, I'll bide my time? I'll wait until he's fit? No. All his fans have bought plane tickets. They've bought hotel rooms. The UFC have done a shitload of promotion. There's not much time. What do? I'll take on, Nate Diaz is available, but he can't fight you at 155. He wants a bit of a concession. Sod it. Let him fight at 170. I'll take him on. No problem. He has bent over backwards to keep fights alive and keep events alive. And then he got beat. So he asked the UFC to do him a solid and let him have the rematch straight away, which they gave him. No brainer with the money that they made from the first fight. He then got the win back, got the title fight with Alvarez, and when he got in the octagon for a title fight at lightweight, he delivered the goods again and won the title. I can't complain about anything he's done there. There's no fight ducking. It's not like he's been sitting on his hands for 7-8 months at a time waiting for fights to happen. He's been active. So to say, but the one thing you can't say about him is he's an active champion. And that's not a criticism, that's just a fact. He hasn't defended his belt because he's been doing this stuff. So while it sounds like saying he's not defended his belt is a criticism, from my standpoint, it really isn't. It's just a statement of fact. So because of that, it is entirely understandable that the UFC would want to then free up that championship again to allow the division to continue. That makes total sense to me. It all comes back to how they've gone about it, and they've gone about it not very well, in my opinion, and in yours. And the idea would have been for McGregor to have come out. Obviously, the press conference after the fight is far too soon to do it, right? So I think he wanted a couple of weeks to sit on the belts and have a bit of fun, and then maybe do it potentially. But it was never explicitly said what he would do. So I think we're at the point now where if he'd have done that would have been the perfect way to draw a line under one chapter of his career. He moves on to the next one. Everyone's happy. Everyone gets what they want. The sport returns to some semblance of order in terms of how the weight divisions work. And I think that's what we're going to get. It's just the means by which the UFC have gone about it has been a bit messy. So I've got no issue with McGregor. I've got no issue with Aldo getting the belt back because he's the next best guy. He's the best guy at 145 pounds. And the fact that there's an interim title fight, I think is totally unnecessary. It's a number one contender fight. It's a title eliminator with a gold belt attached to it. The belt basically means nothing. If the belt wasn't on that fight, it would mean the fight would be worth no less, right? So the winner of that fight fights Aldo. We then have a legitimate undisputed champion at featherweight. All of that is great. That's my take on it. I think McGregor I can't say a bad word about his the way he's gone about himself. He's acted, in terms of leading up to fights. He's lively. Some people can take or leave some of his antics, but watch him in post-fight press conferences. That's the real Conor McGregor. And you see him in post-fight press conferences. He acts with total class and speaks very honestly, very candidly. They're the press conferences that everyone gets excited about. The pre-fight press conferences. It's the post-fight ones that really count. Listen to what he says in those press conferences, because that's the real Conor McGregor. And he has been pure class from when he beat Chad Mendes, when he lost to Nate Diaz. The reaction when he lost to Nate Diaz told us a lot more about McGregor than we've learned in any of his other fights. And he's gone on since then. He's everything that he's got so far he's earned. And the fact that he's asking for more, I think, is legit. I think the situation is shitty. I think it's unfortunate for him that he didn't have, to the best of our knowledge, he hasn't had the opportunity to ceremonially give the belt back. We might find out that he was and he turned it down, but we'll work on what we know now. If he hasn't had that opportunity, then that's a shame, because I think he should have, just out of respect, I think they should have given him the opportunity to do that. And for it to just be announced as a side note during a live event in Australia seems, I don't know. It as you said, it leaves a bit of a sour taste in the mouth. What I do hope now is that McGregor goes on, becomes the sort of champion that I think he can become at lightweight, takes on some of the incredible talent that's in that lightweight division, your Tony Fergusons, your Khabib Nurmagomedovs, maybe a rematch with Jose Aldo, who I'm sure is going to fight at 155 within the next 12 months anyway. There's a whole clutch of great lightweights out there who he can fight. Plus, there's also the possibility of going for 3. That might be on the cards as well. And someone tweeted me and said, does that, the fact that he's lost the first belt, that then means that going for 3 is no good? I'm like, well, no, that's not actually the case. Because no one's ever had 3. You don't have to have them all at the same time. He can be the first to win in 3 divisions. So that fight's still very much on. So I think, for me, I want to see him fight Khabib. That's the fight I want to see. From a sporting perspective, I want to see his next fight be a lightweight title defense. And if it isn't, I think it'll be Nate Diaz. I want it to be Khabib. But whatever happens, I can't criticise what Conor McGregor's done in the last year, 18 months. Circumstances haven't gone the way that he would have wanted. He's rolled with the punches. He's taken everything. And he hasn't deviated from anything he said. If he said, I'm going to fight on such and such a date, he fights on that date. And he's delivered every single time. Even when he lost, he put on a great fight. So absolutely nothing on Conor. I do think it's better that he doesn't have the featherweight belt, however. And I think hopefully things, because he doesn't need it. He's such a big star. He's like Mayweather at this point. He could have no title belts. It doesn't matter. Because all his fights are that big anyway. So it really makes no difference. He'd be like, the old $1 million championship in WWE, the old McGregor belt. He said before 196, I should just I should just jump up and down divisions and have the McGregor belt. But yeah, I think he's gone about it. He's gone about it as well as you could hope for. I think the UFC, it's not a good look. It's not a good look. But I think in 5 to 6 months' time, hopefully, everything will be on a level. All weight divisions will be operating the way that you would want them to in this sort of sport in meritocracy that we hope to see in the UFC. But we'll cross our fingers and see what happens. And people can interpret things however they like. But that's what I want to see.
Well, I want to touch on a few points that you made there, Simon. I mean, the thing about him and his post-fight interviews and his future, I think I want to tie them in together. If we go back to his post-fight interview at UFC 205, it was all about having that conversation with the new owners, which he said he hadn't had the opportunity to have that conversation, or they hadn't approached him, which was mind-boggling to all of us.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've done this now, they've stripped that championship away from him, which seems to have been in a very kind of unceremonious type of way where it didn't really get his blessing for that to have taken place. He's got his girlfriend who's pregnant. He's going to take some time out, he said, to handle family business. And given how often he's fought, no one can really blame him there. I think it's going to be fascinating to monitor what happens next, because We all know that McGregor wants equity in the UFC. By the UFC stripping him of the featherweight championship, they have made him a sympathetic figure in our MMA community. They've empowered him beyond belief, and we're talking about the biggest star in the sport right now. They've just given him some extra power. Right now, McGregor has got so much support, given the way the UFC have stripped him of this championship belt, that he can use that when he finally gets a chance to sit at the negotiation table and hashes out the next deal, whatever that deal may consist of, in terms of fights, in terms of money, in terms of equity, what have you. We've already spoken at length in terms of what we feel as though this means for the featherweight championship, the featherweight division, how Aldo, Pettis, and Holloway can root their way up, and what this means for them. But I think going back to McGregor and the UFC and that particular relationship, that's going to be the key storyline in this whole scenario as we move forward. And who knows, maybe this time next week, when we record next week's show, Simon, there's a statement from Aldo, there's a statement from McGregor, there's a statement from the UFC. He's got his website now, themaclife.com, and if those guys, and I'm sure they are, if they know what they're doing here, I'm sure they're having a conversation with McGregor right now, saying, listen, the minute you want to get a statement out, if we can get it on video or whatever the case may be, let's get it out through the site, because everyone is just on a knife edge right now, waiting patiently to find out what McGregor has to say. Like we said, it's been a few days already. He sent out a few tweets not related to this particular story, but we are all just hoping and waiting and can't wait until he actually makes a statement, because that will probably be one of the most important statements he's made to date in his mixed martial arts career and his UFC career as well.
Yeah, it really is. And you do wonder, he's had a few little power struggles with the UFC in the past. We had the mock retirement. We had the thanks for the cheese, catches later, around fight week of 197, I think it was, that all happened. We had all the chaos of that. And it does make you wonder whether this is more sort of posturing from the two sides. He's dealing with different people now, of course. At the end of the day, when he was dealing with the Fertitas, he was dealing with individual people who he knew personally. And while he could posture around and do things, at the end of the day, the pair, him and Dana and Lorenzo could sit around a table and basically resolve everything. Just like men sitting around a table, just thrashing it out. He's dealing with a huge corporate entity at this point. He's also dealing with arguably the most powerful man in Hollywood as well, in Ari Emanuel. And you don't get to a position like that by being a limp, sort of having no backbone at the negotiating table. So you would imagine that when Ari Emanuel decides this is the deal he wants, he will either get that deal or he'll walk away from the table. So the question is, how do they value Conor McGregor in the bigger picture, and how much are they prepared to bend in order to accommodate what Conor wants? You mentioned the equity thing. I've got to be honest, I can't for the life of me see that happening. I can see him being given options for shares when he retires. I think there's a huge conflict of interest in an active fighter being a shareholder in the promotion that promotes his fights. So if you're Conor McGregor's next opponent and you're not a shareholder in the company and you're fighting the guy who is, you're kind of up against the machine. It's not a good look. But what it is, it's a starting point for negotiating for more money. I think that's realistically the best he can get out of it. And all power to him. And it was really interesting that MMA Junkie did one of their video spots where I think you might even have been involved in it, where you're going around asking the fighters what they thought of the McGregor situation. It was like a mashup thing. And Kevin Lee, who in Belfast vocally called out Conor McGregor, and is a very outspoken guy and very entertaining to listen to. I'm a big fan of his work. And But when they asked him, what do you think about McGregor wanting more money? And he's like, absolutely, the guy deserves more money. You should get whatever he can get because he's the biggest star in the sport. He's earning all the money. So I think the fighters know what's what, and I think it'd be interesting to see what happens. Was the UFC taking a belt off McGregor the way they did? Just a little dig in the ribs, as if to say, just remember just remember who's in charge here. Just remember who the paymasters are. Remember who's in charge. We can take your title off you, and we just have. Now I don't know whether that is what it is. I'd like to think it isn't, but who knows? If you're there may be complex negotiations going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. And you mentioned about him not having had a conversation with the owners, and that the belt's now gone. It's entirely possible that he still hasn't had a conversation with the owners. That would be the most alarming thing of all. If they've just taken the belt and there's been no real conversation. So right now there's an awful lot of grey area that needs to be sort of filled in, and hopefully in the coming weeks we'll get that once Conor's people, or Conor, directly put something out there. I'm sure next time Dana White is put in front of a microphone, he's going to get asked about it. And bit by bit, hopefully, we'll get to learn a little bit more about what's going on. The fact that McGregor possibly isn't going to fight until June next year, in some ways, is to his benefit, because it allows him negotiating time. He's not up against the time frame here. He's basically declared himself on the bench until then. I guess he has the option of fighting early in 2017 if he wants to get one in before Dee's pregnancy starts getting a bit towards the end. But realistically, he can just kick back and say, "Here's what I want. I'm not fighting until June anyway. You've got until then to get it all sorted out. Whatever you need to do, you go away, sort out what you need. I'm the biggest star in your company. If you want me to fight back after 2017, you need to come to me with A, B, C, D. Off your pop. Come back to me when you've got it all." He can do that at this point. And it's the first time an athlete in the UFC has had that sort of pulling power. And it's come at just the time when the new owners have kicked in. So the dynamic is different. And I'm interested to know how that dynamic will progress. Because it's a big difference, because with the Zuffa ownership, they were very public insofar as Dana was front and centre and was right in the thick of what was going on. We now know that Dana doesn't make all the decisions anymore. Dana's the front man. Dana's the sort of the carnival barker, if you like. But it's there's a whole slew of people above him. Patrick Whitesell and Ari Emanuel being the main two. They're the guys pulling the strings now, and we don't hear a thing from them. And so we're all in the dark, and then stuff just happens, like the belt being stripped. So we've got a lot more to go on this, and I don't know quite how it's all going to work out. But I just hope that common sense prevails to some degree on both sides of the coin, and Conor McGregor ends up being as active from next summer onwards as he has been up to this point, because from a journalist point of view, I love covering him. He's a superstar, and when I retire in sort of 20, 30 years time, I can put my feet up and go, wow, I was covering the sport during that golden era of Conor McGregor, and to be able to sit back and say that would be a real privilege to be able to say. So, we hope that this isn't the beginning of the end for him. Fingers crossed it won't be, but. Yeah, we've got a lot of uncertainty ahead of us, Sandhu. It's going to be interesting to see how it all pans out.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of go back to a few of the points you raised there, I don't think this was a power play by the UFC to strip him. You mentioned common sense prevailing. Common sense didn't prevail here, Simon. No. They were trying to plug a hole. All right, they were trying to plug a hole with UFC 206. That's why they did what they did. If Daniel Cormier was still champion, we would still be talking about... if Daniel Cormier wasn't injured, we'd still be talking about McGregor as a two-weight champion right now as we speak. It's because of that situation. They try to plug a hole and in what they think will help them boost pay-per-view numbers for UFC 206. And the way they've gone about it is completely wrong. I don't think it's going to add too much to that. I mean, we don't know what the numbers are. But from the outside looking in, and by looking at some of the metrics and the pay-per-view numbers that respected members of the media, i.e. Dave Meltzer, provide on a pay-per-view event-by-event basis, I don't think this is going to, the interim title is going to exactly bump the needle up too much on what the UFC 206 pay-per-view numbers are whatsoever. I think the UFC have almost given away a lot of power into the hands of the biggest star in the sport right now. And to be honest with you, this is not something that they should be doing heading into what is going to be an absolutely crucial year for the promotion. We all know that they have got some targets to hit revenue-wise. And you are not going to hit those targets without Conor McGregor. It's just a simple fact. Depending on how things go with Ronda Rousey, her fight coming up at the end of December at UFC 207 could very well be her last. If she loses, she's already said, that, she's not here for a long time. She's here for a good time, and she's only here for a couple of more fights. Well, those couple of fights might just be one more fight if Amanda Nunes absolutely demolishes her. So on the one hand, you might be losing Ronda Rousey for the foreseeable future, and now you want to play, this power struggle and battle with Conor McGregor. That's not a wise move. Not a wise move. Yes, the promotion, yes, the UFC will be able to live and last without sort of a Ronda Rousey, without the likes of a Conor McGregor. If they were to call it a day right now, the machine will always move forward. We know that. It's just how well that machine will move forward. How much revenue will it make? And now when they've just bought the business for over $4 billion, as they head towards these new TV broadcast right negotiation deals, which is coming up next year, not just in the US, but tied in with some of the international markets, which includes the UK. Exactly. Now, being able to go to those negotiation tables with the likes of Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor and your bigger stars, that's huge in regards to how much money you can demand. But without them, it can definitely have a massive impact on what kind of deal you can strike. So I think we've covered pretty much every point I think we wanted to. I think the conclusion here is what we said at the beginning of this conversation, Sai, is that there isn't a right or wrong answer. It is open to interpretation. I hope everyone that's listening has been able to take on board what you said and what I've said. Make your own mind up. Tweet us. Let us know what you think. This is going to be an ongoing story. It's going to be hanging over UFC 206 Fight Week in Toronto. So it'll be interesting to see how that particular fight week plays out. And again, I just cannot wait until Aldo and McGregor make a statement. Like you said, Simon, sooner or later, Dana White is going to get asked about this. Now, he may be asked by the fluff media, which is TMZ and Fox Sports, which are basically the UFC's media partners. But listen, any kind of soundbite out of Dana White with regards to the situation is going to be very, very interesting. But like I said, I think McGregor right now, he might be a little sour. He might be a little upset that the fact that he can't parade both titles. He can definitely say he's the people's champion at 145 pounds. He can definitely say he's the legitimate lineal champion at 145 pounds. It's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, I actually think it's amazing how Holly Holm, when she won the championship of Ronda Rousey, she did this incredible media tour, hitting all the main kind of spots in the States, the late night TV shows, the daytime TV shows, the Good Morning Americas. I almost think that had the UFC and Ari Emanuel and Patrick Witzel, had they had a conversation with McGregor prior to 205, or even just after that, had a sit down and say, hey, listen, you're the two-weight champion. Let us parade you now. Let us get you, we'll pay you for this crazy media tour. I'm sure McGregor would have lapped it up because that's more exposure for him. I think they could have done more, is what I'm trying to say. Before they stripped him, because of this stupid situation with UFC 206, they could have done a little bit more promotionally with some advertising and marketing and some of the media opportunities, especially getting out to some outlets that maybe don't cover the sport as regularly as the indigenous MMA media, and just to have that moment with McGregor holding both belts, more photo shoots, more video interviews and more articles and things of that nature. But it's done now. There's no point. Once the toothpaste is out of the out of the
Out the tube.
out of the tube, you can't put it back in.
No.
So here we are. Conor McGregor is officially now just a one-weight UFC champion. He's got one legitimate championship around his waist or on his shoulder, and yeah, we'll see how this whole story develops and plays out. But I'm sure it'll be a reoccurring theme on the Brit Pack Podcast in the many weeks to come.
It will, and we will have the next chapter of that said story will take place pretty much this time tomorrow night, because as you were talking to me then, Sandhu, an email has dropped into my inbox.
The conference call.
Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis are doing a media conference call tomorrow, and no prizes for guessing what most of the questions are going to be about. So that's going to make for fascinating listening to see just what they make of the whole situation, and whether they have any empathy for Conor McGregor in this position. It's especially when you've got one guy, Max Holloway, who's been resident in that featherweight division for as long as he has, without getting a sniff of any UFC gold. Compare that with someone like Anthony Pettis, a former world champion, who is brand new to the featherweight division. You got Holloway, I think he's on like an 8 or 9 fight win streak at 145. And Anthony Pettis, who has had one fight at 145, a very good performance, submitting Charles Oliveira, but they now have an equal shot of picking up interim championship gold, which is one of the sort of the vagaries of the sport. You sometimes get things like this, but they've both come from slightly different directions here. So it'd be interesting to hear what they've got to say. We will have that conference call tomorrow night, so I'm sure we will talk about that on next week's show. Now, we've almost done an hour already, and we've just been talking about Conor McGregor. No surprises.
We knew it was going to be like this. We knew heading into this episode, this is how it was going to be.
There you go. And I know a lot of you will have tweeted us with Conor McGregor related questions and stuff about this general situation. Hopefully what we've gone over in the last hour will at least gone most of the way towards answering most of these questions. So the questions we'll do at the end of the show, I think, Sandhu, are going to be other topics. Is that right?
That is correct, absolutely. But before we get to the Q&A, there are some other things on the itinerary that we have in regards to segments for this week's show. And the next one is reflecting back on UFC Fight Night Melbourne, Simon, where Robert Whittaker got a really impressive victory over Derek Brunson. First round TKO. Now, I'm going to hold my hands up and be the first to admit that I actually skipped out on this UFC card. I've been on the road for quite
disgraceful.
Yeah, I've been on the road for quite some time. And actually, prior to me going on the road, my wife was away. So this weekend it was some quality time with the missus. I did catch up with the key fight, the main event, come Sunday morning. So I did see Whittaker do the business on Brunson. Now, apart from that, I haven't seen any of the action for the rest of the card yet. I know it was a record-tying 10 decisions over the course of the entire fight card. I'm not sure if I'm really going to have the impetus to try and get through that entire fight card at some point this week. Probably not, if I'm honest. But did you stay up for it, Si? How did you digest the fight card, and what was your take on Whittaker getting a massive win in his very first main event slot?
Yeah, I had to deal with this a little bit different myself. I actually I went to bed and woke up for the main card, and I took the view that I need to watch the main card, and if anything outstanding happens in the prelims, I will go back and watch. And I checked the results of the prelims, and I was like, okay, I don't need to check back. So it was, where are we, 7 decisions on the spin on a show that would have been aired on Fox. So you can imagine. Congrats to anyone out there from the UK who sat through all, I think, 13 fights we had on that fight card in the end. Then you really do deserve some sort of hardcore medal for doing that. That would have been a fair old slog. The main card wasn't too bad, in fairness. The fight between Daniel Taylor and Sohee Ham was a little controversial. Taylor won on a split decision, but there were a couple of pretty obvious eye pokes in there that the referee missed. that played a relatively significant effect on the fight. Tyson Pedro, brilliant name, good fighter, submitting Khalil Roundtree, who looks the part, but it looks like he's going to struggle at UFC level. Big, strong guy, but Tyson Pedro did a good job on him, finished him in the first round. Alex Volkanovski, he's one to watch. I like him, Australian prospect. Won by TKO at lightweight, although he thinks he can get down as low as, I think he said he can get down to bantamweight. So that's an interesting one. I think he's going to drop to feather for his next one if the UFC lets him. So he's one to watch. It's good for the Aussies to have someone coming up. He's no youngster though. I think he's probably in his early 30s, but he looks like he might hang around for a bit. Amari Akhmedov versus Kyle Noak. Not the most exciting fight in the world, but the main note on Kyle Noak is he retired after that fight.
I saw that.
And it was such a shame that he wasn't given the opportunity to actually retire in the octagon. They'd done interviews for quite a few of the fights inside the cage, but that wasn't one of them. So presumably because Akhmedov won, and I'm not sure how much English he has, so maybe that's why they did it. But Kyle Noak, famously, he was a sidekick of the legendary Steve Irwin. And he used to work alongside Steve Irwin, lassoing crocodiles and all that sort of stuff in Australia, and then he became a mixed martial arts star. Had a good career in the UFC. He lost by decision. Andrew Holbrook, the most understated man in the UFC, quite possibly, beating Jake Matthews deservedly, in my opinion, but he did it by a split. He's a big prospect, Jake Matthews, but he's struggling to find his feet at the moment. So whether he needs to drop down a few levels or maybe even get some fights outside the UFC, I don't know. Main event though, Rob Whittaker, Derek Brunson. Predictably, I predicted that Brunson would win this, so therefore he lost. You saw the fight, Sandhu. His tactics seem to be hit him with everything I've got and don't worry about getting hit myself. So he just went flying in, wading in with punches, absolutely wide open for counter shots. And I tweeted, just as I tweeted, he's wide open for a counter. I hit enter, the tweet appeared on the screen, and about 3 seconds later, Whittaker cracked him with a counter and wobbled him, and then the fight turned in Whittaker's favour. I thought Whittaker looked very composed, very calm, given that Brunson was just charging at him like a mad person, throwing big, heavy shots that were landing. I thought Whittaker did really well to sort of cover up. He had to take a few on the chin and took them well. And it was a big head kick, big right high kick to the dome that really spelt the end. And then he finished him with strikes. So great performance from Whittaker. Again, he's very understated as well. He doesn't get out there and stake his case too loudly, but what he did say in his post-fight interview, I thought was pretty good. It's just it isn't delivered with as much gusto as his punches. He's a very understated, calm, cool guy. But he's definitely a contender at 185 now. I don't know who they're going to give him next, and I guess that's the big question: who are they going to give him next? He needs one of the top four, top five. And I think it all stems on who Gegard Mousasi fights next. And I think because Luke Rockhold was going to fight Jacare, then Luke Rockhold got injured. Then Mousasi beat Uriah Hall and called out Rockhold. That would be a great stylistic fight to make. So if they do Mousasi versus Rockhold, then you could potentially put Whittaker in there with Jacare, which would be a huge test for the Aussie. Or do you keep the Rockhold Jacare fight as originally scheduled and do Mousasi versus Whittaker, which on paper looks a little more realistic. But we've now got 4 guys there who are ready to go. Chris Weidman obviously isn't going to fight for a little while, having got busted up by Yoel Romero. So he's out of the picture probably for 3 months, I would imagine. So it's really what the UFC want to do with Jacare. Who are they going to give Jacare? I think whoever's left, they should give to Whittaker. But he proved his worth. I thought he did very well. The fight from a technical perspective, all the technical breakdown people online, your Luke Thomases, Dan Tom, Robin Black, Jack Slack, they would have been watching that through the gaps between their fingers, because there was zero defense going on from Derek Brunson, and he paid for it in the end. So, but it was a good, it was a very fun fight. One of the most exciting rounds we've had in 2016. Technically not fantastic, but it was good fun.
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, Whittaker's only 25 years old.
That's nuts.
Since moving to, it's crazy. Since moving to middleweight, he's won 6 on the spin. He's got plenty of time to figure things out, to improve. Even though he's a New Zealander, he obviously loves to fight in Australia, which again is still a very important market for the UFC. They do go back at least once a year to Australia. But yeah, I agree with pretty much your assessment on the fight. I agree with your assessment with regards to the potential matchmaking for Whittaker moving forward. I believe it all rests on what they do with Rockhold and Mousasi. I personally think, and this is kind of my bold prediction, I've got a feeling Rockhold and Mousasi is going to headline the London card in March. That's what I think they're going to do. I know that the UFC's European PR team love working with Gegard. He seems to be a favourite of theirs. Rockhold has visited Europe on quite a few occasions as a guest fighter. I think the fact that the Jacare fight fell through, that would have put him in a really good spot had he won that fight. But he needs to get into a main event picture where it's a fight night card, it's a 5-rounder, all the focus and the spotlight is on him, and vice versa for Mousasi. He's broken himself now into the top 5 with that revenge/rematch victory over Uriah Hall in Belfast, but he needs that one more to kind of solidify his position as a genuine number 1 contender. Jacare hasn't fought in a while, so I don't think just by waiting on the sidelines that's going to be enough for him to get himself into a title shot scenario. I also just, as a general point of view on Jacare, love what he does inside the octagon. He just needs to give us more. He needs to do more promotionally. He needs to do that for himself more than anybody else. You look at some of the other fighters who have, learned the English language, who have been out there doing a lot of, really unique promotional things to kind of, boost their name and get their name out there a little bit more, get fans interested in wanting to see them fight outside of the obvious, which is, of course, you're a fantastic mixed martial artist. I think by putting him into a situation where he's either fighting in a headline fight night card or maybe a co-main event, we'll take him in London too, Simon. Him versus Whittaker in a co-main event with Rockhold and Mousasi in the main event, we'll take that all day long. What we do know, Simon, is that with this fight night card in London in March, we're not getting Bisping, which is going to be the very first time in quite some time in the UK that, or should I say specifically in England, that we're going to have a fight card without Michael Bisping involved. So they're going to need to do something special, because so far, when they do come to a market like England, specifically a city like London, they seem to break records every time they come back to London. The gate's higher, the numbers, the attendance is higher, and you're only as good as your last card. And last time they were in London, we got that fantastic Anderson Silva Michael Bisping main event, which up until now is still the most amount of media I've seen gather for a UFC event in London, and it was that Anderson Silva factor at the time. So without kind of drifting onto too many different areas, trying to bring it back all the way to Robert Whittaker. Great performance, great win. He seems to have come away with that pretty unscathed. We're now at the end of November, creeping into December. I think if you gave Robert Whittaker a call and say, hey, do you want to fight a Gegard Mousasi or a Jacare in London in March, I think he'll take that all day long.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think I like your idea for having both those fights at UFC London. Rockhold, of course, was the guest fighter at UFC London, Bisping versus Silva, so he knows his way. He knows how to find the O2 Arena. He's been there, so who knows? And you're dead right with the Mousasi ties to the European PR team. He's entering media darling territory in this part of the world. It's It's an interesting one. They've got options. They can shake it out however they want. They've got 4 legit contenders there. You could almost pluck them out of a hat, match them up, stick them on a fight card, and let them go. And then it all works out nicely. And of course, we've got Yoel Romero versus Michael Bisping, and that's going to be full of heat. Fight week for that fight is going to be nuts. Because Romero is just going to be sitting there in shades, talking gibberish for most of the time, probably, which is what he likes to do in press conferences and stuff. But
I love you, Mike.
there you go.
See you soon, boy.
And then
I love you.
and Bisping will just be in full on wind up mode for the whole fight week. So that'll be good. The middleweight division is looking like a lot of fun right now. You think it wasn't that long ago people were saying it got a bit stale? Not anymore. We've got great fights everywhere we turn at 185, which is great. Somewhere where they have struggled to find great fights is 125. Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, I can't describe it other than he's too good. He's legitimately too good, because he's got a problem, because A, he's better than everybody else, and B, the nature of the flyweight division is such that you don't really see fighters ripping through the division, racking up a string of big, spectacular knockouts like you might get at middleweight or at light heavyweight, and because you just tend not to see those as much at flyweight. So it's very hard to build a contender. Also, there's the fact he's been through every major contender at 125 at least once, and in some cases twice. So what do you do? Well, the UFC got a little bit original. They shopped around. They found as many 125-pound champions that they could contractually get their hands on, threw them into an Ultimate Fighter tournament, and we're on the cusp of the finale at this point. Now, I'm not going to lie. I've not been watching this season, Sandhu, so I'm kind of hedging my bets over what to say.
I'm shocked, Simon. I know. I'm absolutely shocked.
This is the first season, actually, since I've been covering the sport that I haven't followed. I've got to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, it's the first one. Now, has the actual finalist been officially announced yet?
You know what, Simon? I'm hesitant to say this, but I'm looking on the Wikipedia.
I've not seen it.
Well, I haven't seen it either, and I know
I'm aware of who it is, but
I am too.
Yeah.
But look, I'm just going on by what Wikipedia is telling me right now, and it's telling me that the main event for this Saturday night's fight card is Demetrius Johnson versus Tim Elliott.
Right.
That's what it's telling me. Right now, I haven't seen the show. I actually haven't seen The Ultimate Fighter for quite some time. But if we're going on the basis that at some point this week, I don't know. Again, I don't know where we are currently with the show. I don't know if the season finale was last week. I don't know if it's going to be this Wednesday. I'm not entirely sure. But let's just go on the basis right now, Simon. What Wikipedia is telling us, and it's Tim Elliott. What we do know about Tim Elliott is that he had a run in the UFC. It didn't go, according to plan. He won a couple. He lost 3 on the trot, and then he was let go. But he kind of fought his way back and kind of had a good run in Titan FC, and actually he seems to be the fighter that everyone seems to be talking about a lot on the show. I have seen a few snippets, Simon, when we were in Belfast and we were waiting for the ceremonial weigh-ins to begin. The UFC ran, I think, the most recent episode as a kind of like a warm-up video package for everyone in the arena. And I saw a few, bits and pieces and so forth. But to be honest with you, the whole focus here is definitely on Demetrius Johnson. He's arguably the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world right now. You can definitely make a case for him to be the number one pound-for-pound fighter. He's been a defending champion. You can only beat what's put in front of you in that particular weight class. Like you said, Simon, he's getting into George St. Pierre territory now, where he's wiped out the division a few times over. How close is he, Simon, to beating Anderson Silva's record? Do you know where he is with that?
I think he's 2 or 3 fights away.
Okay.
I think he's 2 or 3 fights away, because the natural thing to think would be, if and when he wins his next one, the obvious thing would be for him to then go for the super fight with Dominic Cruz.
Right.
At 135. Because he really has cleaned everything out. He's looking at rematches at this point. So he has said he wants to break Anderson Silva's record. So in order to do that, he's going to have to sort of retrace his steps and maybe fight Henry Cejudo again or fight Joe Benavidez again. So I don't know quite what they're going to do. I think in an ideal world for Demetrius, he'll at least equal Anderson Silva's record and then maybe go for that super fight with Dominic Cruz. But it is getting increasingly difficult because all the while this is happening, of course, because the amount of credible challenges is just going. Every time he beats somebody decisively, it just reduces the interest of a rematch as well. If you beat Henry Cejudo as decisively as he did, then how much interest is there really going to be in a rematch? He knocked out Joe Benavidez. How much interest is there going to be in a rematch? He's beaten Joe Benavidez twice. So,
yep.
And Joe Benavidez is probably the next best guy in the division, if we're honest. So that's the problem he's got. So the level of interest in his fights is actually dropping the better he gets. It's an unfortunate position insofar as his earning potential. He doesn't seem in the least bit concerned about it, and I've spoken to him about it in the past. He's not bothered. Mm-hmm. He doesn't give a stuff who he fights. He's got a contract that tells him how much he gets paid to show and how much he gets paid to win. He doesn't fight on pay-per-view that often, so maybe he isn't missing pay-per-view points. So because he's fighting on free TV most of the time, but for a guy of his ability, it just seems a real shame that he isn't getting the same love and the same amount of financial recompense that a guy of his undoubted skill level should be getting. But this is just the way of the world, so it's difficult, and I don't think that will change until he moves up to 135, and at that point he's going to be ridiculously undersized for the division. Because he's not a huge 125er. No. There are a lot of bigger 125ers than him. If you stood him next to Damasio Page, for example, who competed in this season of Tough, and I had him picked as someone who could have potentially won that competition. And Damasio Page is probably a good 3-4 inches taller than Demetrius Johnson. So, it's interesting, and when he goes in, if he fights at 135, he's going to be the little underdog. So I don't really know what's next for him. Are the UFC going to encourage him to sort of say, look, you don't need this record; it's worth nothing to you. Here's $1 million fight with Dominic Cruz. Why not take that? So I don't know. It's a tough spot for him. He certainly, whenever he gets asked about it, and I'm sure he's sick to the back teeth of being asked about it because it is the big story with him. He doesn't seem overly concerned about it. Last time I asked him, he was more concerned with pressure washing his fence. That's actually what he said. He said, "I've got more concerns than this. After this fight, I've got to pressure wash my fence because the housing association tell you off if you don't keep your property clean because it reduces house prices around and stuff." So this actually happened in a flipping scrum. And sure enough, he won his fight against Henry Cejudo. And then 2 days later, he tweets a picture of him pressure washing his fence. Genius. But that's it. He's I don't know what else you can do with him. I think you somehow get him into that 135 division and getting some fresh matchups as much as anything. Because he's just too good.
I think you're right, Simon. I think he's fine being a co-main event on a pay-per-view or maybe a headline act on a fight card. I think he knows at this stage, he's not going to be making Conor McGregor money. To be fair, most other champions aren't making Conor McGregor money. So I think Demetrius Johnson, I'd personally like to see him continue this run at flyweight, beat Anderson Silva's record first and foremost, because nobody then can take that away from you. It's almost unheard of to get 8, 9, 10 title defenses in a run like that. It's so hard to do in mixed martial arts. That's why it makes it so fascinating when you compare it to boxing. This sport is so unpredictable because there's so many ways you can win and lose. So personally, just from a legacy point of view, I'd like to see him continue to do that at the weight class, regardless of who his opponents are. Just get the next best guy you can, even if it's someone he's fought before, like a Joey B or a Henry Cejudo or whoever the next fighter may be, just to kind of keep him active and keep him going towards that record. Once he hits that record, absolutely, let's get him up to 135, or maybe even do a catch weight fight with Dominic Cruz at 130. Something tells me with McGregor and what he did at UFC 205, you're going to see a lot of fighters try and emulate that, whether it be DJ going up to 135 as a champion and having a champion versus champion fight with Dominic Cruz, whether it's Dominic Cruz, going up from 135 to 145 and fighting a Jose Aldo or whoever the next legitimate featherweight champion will be. And hey, look, let's see what happens with Daniel Cormier. He could very well come back, beat Anthony Rumble Johnson when they, eventually fight. And depending on what happens with Cain Velasquez and Fabrizio Verdum, if Cain loses that fight, hey, listen, Daniel, you're a heavyweight, really. You cut a hell of a lot of weight to get to 205. Why not, before he calls it a day, jump back up to heavyweight and fight Stipe Miocic, for example, and carry two belts around. What we've seen now with McGregor is he's dreamt beyond what other fighters have dreamt of doing before. And I think he's opened up everyone's imagination in terms of what is possible, what you can potentially do if you really want to do it, and what that can mean for your legacy, but also your earning potential. So, but yeah, to tie it back to Demetrius Johnson, I see him just wiping the floor with Tim Elliott. I think it'll be a one-sided fight. I see Demetrius Johnson most likely getting a decision victory, although he has proven time and time again, although he's fighting in a much lower weight class, he does tend to finish quite a large portion of his opponents. But yeah, looking forward to it. I'm definitely looking forward to this weekend's fight card way more than I was the Melbourne card. I think I'll definitely be staying up for this one. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Shall we head off into our much admired, much appreciated Q&A segment of the show, Simon?
Let's do it. But before we do that, I've got a question for you.
Yeah,
I've got a question for you, and it follows on from what we've just discussed. We're talking about this whole show has been about two weight world champions, isn't it? It's been obviously mostly about Conor, but we've touched on a couple of other possibilities. If we were sitting here right now, which we are, and you had to put £10 of your hard-earned English money on the next fighter to become a two-weight world champion, not necessarily concurrently, someone who can win a second world or become a world champion in two weight classes, who would you put your money on? Because there's a few out there who could potentially do it. Who would you, if you could pick one, say, that person has got the best chance to become the next two-weight world champion in the UFC?
Simultaneous, or are we talking about former champions?
It could be former champions. It could be whoever you like. So you could go with an Anthony Pettis as an example.
Well, that's the logical one, because he seems to be the one that is the closest to doing it. I mean, he could literally win his fight in 2 weeks' time against Max Holloway, and then have that Jose Aldo unification bout booked in for Q1 of next year. We've got some big pay-per-view cards coming up, UFC 208, UFC 209, which are going to need some big title fights anyway. So he seems to be the most, I suppose, logical person for me to put something on.
He's best placed, isn't he?
He is best placed. I mean, the only other person I could potentially think of is George St. Pierre if he comes back and he fights Michael Bisping for that middleweight championship. I mean, it's a fight that's been talked about already. They should have booked that for Toronto, but and like, you know, even though technically Yoel Romero is the number one contender, who's to say? I mean, if we're just playing fantasy matchmaker right now, and we were able, you know, hey, Romero could get injured. They may want to just, you know, give GSP a call, say, hey, we've got a big, you know, fight card coming up, and we couldn't get it done for Toronto, but can we sort it out for the next one? You know, he's a former champion at welterweight. You know, he'd be quite comfortable at the middleweight weight class, and I think a lot and many would favour him to beat Michael Bisping. So for me, it's Pettis and perhaps George St. Pierre. What about you?
The GSP thing came out of left field. I didn't see that one coming, but yeah, that's a good shout. Well, I would actually, if I was betting on that fight, I would be betting on Bisping to win it for two reasons. One, I think he'd be the underdog, and B, I think most of the intangibles are in his favour for that fight. But it's winnable for GSP though. He could win that fight. But I think Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson could beat Dominic Cruz. I think that's a coin flip fight. I think, and if you're looking at like super high level guys, like from a technical perspective, going for a world championship, two world championship level guys going for a title, you'd do well to find a better technical matchup anywhere in any weight class than Demetrius Johnson moving up to bantamweight to fight Dominic Cruz. I'd love to see that. I think that's a good shout, and I think DC for me is probably. I think DC's a better heavyweight than Cain Velasquez. I think it's close, but I think DC might be a better heavyweight than Cain Velasquez. And I think in the heavyweight division right now, Cain is the best bet to beat Stipe. I'd pick Stipe to beat Cain right now, I think. But I think DC versus Stipe would be an awesome fight. And again, I think that's a coin flip fight. So DC, I think, is the other guy. And there's a certain Mr. J. Jones Esquire who, if he ever gets his act together and gets back into the UFC, you never know, he might even return at heavyweight. And Mr. John, you can't imagine it will take him long to get a title shot if he comes back and decides he wants to fight a heavyweight. So he could do it as well. But if I was putting my money down right now, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, he'd be my guy.
Well, I guess we're going to find out over the course of the next year, because guys like DJ, guys like Dominic Cruz, guys like Anthony Pettis, and I'm sure at some point we're going to see the return of George St. Pierre. These are all guys that have the ability to do it and are in a position to potentially become two-weight champions. And it's only a good...
I got one more. Ioane and Jacek. If they make that UFC 125-pound division, you can bet every pound in the bank that she's going to go for that world title. And that's a possibility as well. I just wanted to mention that. Go on, off you go. Sorry.
No. I mean, that's a good shout. I was thinking of that, but I was thinking of divisions that we actually have.
Yeah. There's me doing my pie in the sky predictions again.
No, it's a good shout though, and she's been quite vocal about that herself. She wants to, or she wants the UFC to create a 125-pound division so she can go up in weight class. I think eventually she's going to have to. I don't think she really enjoys cutting down to strawweight too much. And I think if the UFC were able to create a 125-pound division, she wants to do what Conor McGregor's done. And unfortunately for her, at the moment, she's unable to do that because the disparity in weight divisions from strawweight to bantamweight is just too much. She'll be undersized at bantamweight. 125, we may even see a better version of Jan Jacek where she doesn't have to cut as much weight and she's a little bit healthier. She's able to carry a little bit more muscle on her frame. So, I mean, can you just think about the possibilities when you can have a few of the bantamweights drop down to 125 and you can have Jan Jacek with some fresh matchups. But I think it's time, Simon, we crack on, because I appreciate everyone tweeting us and everyone's finally getting it right. You don't want to hit up Simon and you don't want to hit up me.
But please follow me, though.
Appreciate that you do hit us up on Twitter. But the main handle you guys want to include when you're asking your questions is the Brit Pack MMA. That's the feed that I'm looking at. I'll give your question a like to indicate that we're going to be asking it on the next up and coming show. I know that whilst me and Simon were on the road last couple of weeks, a lot of you threw in some questions. A lot of them became redundant because obviously we live in a fast-paced world here in MMA, and the news cycle moves very, very quickly. So I thought it'd be best to just focus on the questions that were asked over the course of the last 24 hours. So with that being said, Simon, I think we've pretty much been over this already, but I wanted to ask, apart from the main event, RG asks, it's been a quiet MMA news week. Well, I think he's probably asked this before the McGregor news dropped. But are you looking forward to next week's Tournament of Champions finale. We've talked about the main event, Simon. We're obviously interested in that. But if you look at the actual fight card, is that appetizing enough for you to stay up for the entire night?
It is. I've got to be honest. There's some good. There's some what you would call some sneaky good fights on that card. You know, it's not stacked with A-listers, but there's some good matchups on there. Ellenberger Masvidal looks like a cracking matchup to me. Benavidez Cejudo, obviously for those who have been following the show much more religiously than I have, will be all too well aware of the bickering rivalry that has been going on between the pair of them. I've seen bits and pieces of it, and it looks like proper schoolboy stuff. So those two, as what was it Muhammad Ali said, they're going to get it on because they don't get along. So that's going to happen. I'm looking forward to that. Sarah McMahon versus Alexis Davis, I think is a solid matchup at 135. Gray Maynard is still going in the UFC, and he looked good in his last outing, actually. I think he looked pretty good last time he fought. Can't remember who he fought. I'm going to jump on and find out. But he's taking on Ryan Hall, who, a former tough graduate himself, got to the finale and did the business. And he's an excellent grappler, really good grappler, and that's going to be a real clash of styles, wrestling versus jiu-jitsu. Gray Maynard snapped a 4-fight losing streak in his last fight, beat a guy called Fernando Bruno in Vegas by decision. But he fought through some adversity in that fight and came out the other end. So all credit to him. So it's not the same guy that battered Frankie Edgar from pillar to post and nearly beat him. He's sort of gone down a few levels since then, but he's still got plenty to give. So that was an interesting one. Rob Font was due to fight in Manchester. He was going to fight Ian Entwistle, and we missed out on that fight because NT got ill on Wayne Day. So he's been rescheduled. He's fighting. Carlin Curran versus Jamie Moyle. Jamie Moyle came through tough as well. And Carlin Curran is a good, exciting, but still quite raw strawweight. So I think that'll be an exciting fight. There's a few good fights in there. And one of the Dong Hyun Kims is in action as well. So tune in to find out which one is going to turn up. It's going to be the little one, the lightweight Dong Hyun Kim. So we've got some good stuff there. I think if I was picking one fight out, like Ellenberger Masvidal would be the one I'm really looking forward to.
I like it. Cage side now. I love some of these Twitter handles. I mean, I wish I could just read out the person's name. Maybe I'm a little bit old school for that, but some of these Twitter handle names. I mean, I appreciate you guys tweeting in. Anyway, Cage side now tweets in. Who do you guys expect the UFC to sign next from the UK? For me, it's a simple one. It's Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. I think he's on a good run with Cage Warriors. He's their featherweight champion. He's the right personality. He's got the charisma. I think he still needs to improve on his in-cage ability, which I'm sure will come in time. Fighting out of that next-gen gym in Liverpool. But I think he's fighting for Cage Warriors. They've got that deal with UFC Fight Pass. He's getting that prime time slot now with BT Sport, which is fantastic to really kind of showcase some of the UK's and Europe's best talent to a prime time MMA audience in the UK. For me, that would be my bet on the next guy or gal that gets signed by the UFC from the UK. And who knows, it might even happen in preparation for the London card, given the fact that the likelihood is we won't have Michael Bisping fighting on that card.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised if some sort of pre-contract was already in place, to be honest. I think, or certainly an unspoken, sort of unwritten agreement maybe, but it's going to be a matter of time. I mean, time's on his side. He's only young still, so I think what they've done, keeping him in Cage Warriors, is probably the right thing for right now. But I think it's just a matter of time before he gets his shot. I'll chuck in a different name and a guy who should already be in the UFC, Saul Rogers. They've got to sign the man up. They've got to sign Saul Rogers, and he for me is the best lightweight outside of the UFC that I've seen. On this side of the world for certain, he's too good to not be in the UFC. He smoked everybody in tough, and because they made a mess of his visa form, he didn't get his chance. So that needs to be dealt with now. That bygones are bygones. It's not like he didn't hit a ref. He didn't take any banned substances. He's not done anything outlandishly out of order or anything like that. Give the man his chance. He's got a fantastic attitude, and he's dealt with the whole thing incredibly maturely. And I've got a lot of respect for the guy, both as a fighter and as a bloke as well. And I think he deserves his shot. One other person I need to mention, because I put out a piece of content about him this week. John Phillips, the White Mike Tyson from Wales, former Commonwealth Games boxer, I believe. He's a knockout artist, fights at middleweight, occasionally has trouble hitting middleweight, but he fights at middleweight. Former BAMMA middleweight champion. And he's contracted to BAMMA right now. He's desperate to get signed by the UFC, and he put out a load of pictures. In fact, he put out a selfie video message saying the two Welsh lads have signed for the UFC. They both won. Well done. Blah, 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 blah. Jack Marshman's a middleweight, but I'm the best middleweight in Wales. I want to fight Jack Marshman, and I want to fight him in London in March. Let's make this fight happen. So he put that out. All's well. I did a story on it. Did quite well. Then a couple of days later, I'm just on Twitter, sort of scouring Twitter like I do, checking for stuff, and I start seeing these pictures appearing. John Phillips has gone out for the day and has taken one of these old school sort of, with the old finger dial on the front telephones from like the 1970s and the 1980s, and he took one on a day out. So he had one on his pillow on his bed when he woke up in the morning. He took it into the shower with him washing his hair. Went and got a haircut. Went to the beach. Had an ice cream with it. Went to the amusement arcade with it, and took pictures all along the way. So I put all those together to a Blondie track hanging on the telephone, and that did quite well on Twitter. He's desperate to get signed by the UFC. Whether BAMMA will let him go that easily, I don't really know. But he's desperate to get into the UFC. He wants to fight Jack Marshman. So whether he's the next Brit to get signed, I don't know. But if you're giving points for effort, then John Phillips deserves a go. He's been hilarious this week, so I wanted to mention him.
Yeah, good shout. All right. So Cage Side Now did ask a second question, which I actually want to get to. And it's, what other UK media people do you read or listen to? I'm happy to give a shout out, and I'm sure, Simon, you can give a shout out as well. Jonathan Schrager of mixedmartialarts.com, i.e. The Underground, does some great stuff. He's almost doing some stuff that me and Abby used to do back in the day when we had just a YouTube channel and we were covering the sport, thinking of some unique video concepts using what we had. And at the time, I remember one of the things I've seen Jonathan do on the UG, on their YouTube channel, is get a lot of media reaction content, which is great, because when you're on a fight week, sometimes access to fighters is limited. You may try and grab them in the hotel lobby at the risk of getting a slap on the wrist by the UFC PR machine. But what you've got there during a fight week are journalists that can speak eloquently and intelligently about the sport. And there's so many hot topics out there, and I think there's enough journalists out there that are followed passionately by members of the MMA community that what they say has credence. And to be able to get a mashup of, say, 5 or 6 guys together and gals on a topic or two, I think that's good video content. So yeah, if I'm going to give anybody a shout out from the top of my head right now, check him out, Jonathan Schrager. He's a fellow Brit. He's from Manchester. Does some great work for the UG on mixedmartialarts.com and their YouTube channel. Some of his interviews are a little bit lengthy, but hey, that's okay, because I think some people want short and snappy, interviews with maybe 4 or 5 minutes with some production value. Some would prefer just to sit back and relax and watch a half an hour, 45-minute, 60-minute sit-down interview. And what Jonathan does really, really well is conduct those lengthier, long-form interviews. So shout out to Jonathan Schrager from my part.
Yeah, I call him the king of the fireside chat, because that's kind of the format that he does. And yeah, he's a top man, and one of the most genuine guys you could ever meet as well. A really lovely guy. Andreas Georgiou is a guy I would mention. He works really hard. He covers a lot of kickboxing as well. If you're into kickboxing, he's worth a follow. Does a lot of good stuff. Young lad, I think he's just graduated actually. So he's certainly one to look out for. And if I can just bend that question just a tad to cover Ireland, I need to shout out someone who's a relatively good buddy of mine. I see him quite a lot on the road, and he's one of the best writers, not just in this part of the world, but anyway. PC Carroll. I'd definitely shout out PC Carroll. If you're an MMA fan from this part of the world and you're not following him, to be honest, I'd be quite surprised because he's excellent. So it's always worth giving him a shout out because he's a top lad, and B, he's an excellent writer. So yeah, I'd shout out him, even if that does mean slightly tweaking the question. But yeah, PC Carroll.
It's not the first time, and it won't be the last time that you tweak a question, Simon. Moving forward, then, Gareth Moores tweets in and says, "Who would you like to see headline the London card, and what other fights would you like to see?" So I guess we're both in agreement, Simon, that we think and believe and would, I think, hope that the UFC puts on Gegard Mousasi versus Luke Rockhold. I think that's a fight that makes a lot of sense for a number of different reasons. Most notably that it's a fight that means something in the 185-pound division. It's two fighters that have been synonymously in and around European UFC fights, both as fighters on Mousasi's part and as guest fighters on Rockhold's part. But in regard to what other fights you'd like to see, I'm not sure about particular fights, but I'd like to see Jimmy Manuwa on the card. I'd like to see Alexander Gustafsson if he can heal from his back injury in time. I'd like to see him be brought in on the card. He's the biggest star in Sweden. He's one of the biggest stars in Europe, and has a great, passionate following of Swedish fans that following him along. And to kind of get that Swedish atmosphere going in the O2 Arena would be pretty cool. I think depending on what happens in Sacramento, win or lose, especially if he loses, I hope the UFC give Brad Pickett one more go. To be honest with you, I think he should have called it a day a while ago. I thought we had a great opportunity at the London card from this year. He decided to, again, fighters, when they get when they snap a losing streak, they get a win. They get that hunger for more. But I think heading into the London card for 2017, he's just not going to get another better opportunity if things go his way and he gets that fight to kind of go out on the big show, on the big stage, on top. He'll be fighting forever anyway. He's really getting up there in age. But yeah, win or lose against Uriah Faber, I'd like to see the UFC stick Brad Pickett on that London card as well. Any fights or fighters come to mind for you, Simon?
I've got 3 fights, and they actually reference people that you've mentioned. So I want to see Brad Pickett versus Neil Seery 2. Because Brad Pickett told me in Belfast that he wants to retire in London. He wants that to be his last fight. Neil Seery needs one more fight. So there would be a nice sort of cyclical justice to it, because Neil Seery stepped in at short notice to fight Brad Pickett in Seery's first ever fight in the UFC in London. And it was a barn burner of a fight. Pickett won it by decision. Brad offered to step in to fight Seery in Belfast, and Sean Shelby sort of shut that one down. Obviously, Brad has got bigger fish to fry in the form of Uriah Faber in Sacramento next month. Brad Pickett versus Neil Seery, with both guys hanging them up inside the octagon. Two true warriors of the sport. Huge fan favourites. That would just be like the ultimate feel-good moment. They would deliver an amazing fight. They both have mad respect for each other. They're two sort of working-class guys who, they're hugely popular with the fans, and they could both put their gloves down in the middle of the octagon. It would be a real sort of goosebumps moment, I think, and it would be, the perfect way for both guys to sort of round out their career a couple of years after they first fought in the same building. So that would be kind of amazing. I'd love to see that. Jimmy Manuwa needs a big fight, and I would give him Glover Teixeira. I would put Jimmy Manuwa and Glover Teixeira in the main card in London. That could sit as a co-main, or maybe third from top if you've got those 2 big middleweight fights we discussed. Maybe that will be the third from top. That seems like a natural progression fight for me for Jimmy Manuwa. Glover's coming off a loss to Anthony Rumble Johnson. He doesn't want to fall too far down the ladder. Manuwa sort of seems to fit the bill there. I think that fight makes sense. And this one is a little out of left field. You mentioned him earlier. Maybe they can get Paddy the Baddy signed up. And if they did, why not stick him in there with Makwan Amirkhani? What a fight that'd be. Makwan Amirkhani, Paddy Pimblett at 145 pounds. I think that would be an awesome matchup at featherweight. So there you go, there's 3 fights for you. Paddy versus Makwan, Manuwa versus Glover Teixeira, and my favourite fight of the lot, Brad Pickett versus Neil Seery. I'd buy a ticket just to watch that.
Good shout on Makwan, and I've spoken to him recently, and he's also nursing an injury, but I think it looks likely that he's aiming to return in and around the time that the UFC returns to London, so that would make a lot of sense. Right, I'm very aware that we're approaching almost a 2-hour mark, which I think is some history here for the Brit Pack. So I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question, just due to the timing of how long this show has gone on for. And yeah, please do let us know if we're rambling on a little bit too long in these episodes, because I'm sure we are. And if you want us to cut it down and just get to the nitty gritty of some of these segments, then please do let us know. But one more question to wrap things up, and it's UFC Kyle, and he says, if DC gets injured again, should he be stripped? I think if it's maybe any other weight class and you've got a champion who hasn't fought in a year or is consistently getting injured, then yeah, absolutely, you strip them so that the division can move forward. The thing with light heavyweight is you've already got what many consider to be the legitimate lineal UFC champion already on the sideline in John Jones. You've also got the next couple of guys in Anthony Rumble Johnson and Alexander Gustafsson who have been beat by both DC and, well, maybe not Rumble Johnson, but DC for sure. Now, if DC is injured, I don't think it hurts anyone in that light heavyweight division by just giving him the opportunity to rest, recover, and then come back for a title defense fight, because the light heavyweight division is very, very shallow. It's pretty much been the same 3 or 4 guys for the last 3 or 4 years. And it's a division that needs a hell of a lot of work. Jimmy Manuwa now got a signature victory in Manchester. Hopefully he can get one more, and then he's right in there in title contention. Maybe it'll take some fighters dropping down from heavyweight who are maybe things aren't working out there. Maybe it'll take guys like a Chris Weidman from the middleweight division, who's on a 2-fight skid at 185, and he's very comfortable walking around at that 205-pound weight class. So maybe it'll take him to kind of go into that division and freshen things up. But until those things happen, I think if DC gets injured again, you just hold off, let him rest and recover and recuperate, get him into a title fight with Anthony Rumble Johnson, and then just wait and see how long it will be until John Jones comes back, because that's going to be the real big fight at 205 pounds. So that's my take. I mean, I don't know what you think about that. I mean, I don't know if it's supposed to be, or if you think it should be, one specific rule for one particular weight class or one particular fighter and one for others, or it should be one rule that fits all. I mean, what's your take on that, Si?
I think the ideal scenario is you have a rule of thumb where you say, okay, if the belt hasn't been defended within X amount of time, we either strip you of the title or we then implement an interim belt. It's a tricky one because the light heavyweight division is moving slower than my metabolism right now. So it's not exactly a particularly stacked division, and the championship not getting defended, it doesn't have a major effect on the rest of the division because it's not the featherweight division, it's not the lightweight division. So I think they can have a little bit more latitude with it, and I tend to agree with you. Stripping someone of the belt should be the last resort in all cases. You should only ever strip someone of the title as an absolute last resort. If someone has been proved to be a cheat, whether it be anti-doping offences or anything like that, then fine, strip them. But aside from that, stripping people of the belt should be the absolute last case scenario. So my answer would probably be no. Let him keep hold of the belt. If he's getting into Dominic Cruz territory in terms of his injuries, then yeah, there needs to be a chat with him, and you come up with a solution whereby maybe you do strip him of the belt, or you implement an interim title. So the thing with stripping someone of the belt, and this I don't want to labour this, but if you strip someone of the belt, especially someone who has gone on a run, and you got consecutive title defences is a thing. It's a stat that champions like to build up, and we've talked about it with Demetrius Johnson. Now, just because you get injured, that shouldn't really impact on your... Like, if GSP comes back and he's come straight back into a title fight and wins, that's effectively as if he's never lost the belt. But for the record, he did lose the belt because it was taken off him. So it's... But with something like an injury where it's only a relatively short period of time, or a year at most maybe, then you shouldn't really be taking a belt off someone in that sort of period of time just because of injury. So I think you let him keep the belt. I think if it looks like he's going to be out of action for like 18 months or so, then maybe that's the sort of area where you start to think about it. But anything less than that, I think it's a bit harsh. So I would say no, let him keep it.
Fair player. And yeah, again, like I said, just due to the fact that we're creeping up to 2 hours, that's where I'm going to cut our Q&A segment for this week. But we do appreciate you guys hitting us up. Do tweet us throughout the week. Hit us up at the Brit Pack MMA with any of your questions, and we'll make sure to include it on the show. And this will be the format moving forward. Like I said at the top of the show today, me and Simon are off the road now for quite some time, which means we'll be doing the show in our usual format for the foreseeable future. Although we may have something special planned for UFC 206. So I guess we'll just leave it at that for the time being, and perhaps announce something a little bit more official on next week's show.
Yeah, good plan. It's going to be, if that works out, it'll be good fun. So please do stay tuned for that. A bit of a bumper edition this week, Sandy. We had a lot to talk about, though, to be fair. It was one of the bigger talking points in MMA this year, and we've had a few, but as stories go, they don't get much bigger than this, I don't think. I think this is right up there with the big ones. So, and when you think we had all of the furore around UFC 200, John Jones failed drug test, Brock Lesnar's failed drug test, I think this might be bigger than both of those. So, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. So I apologise, but I don't apologise. We had a lot to discuss on the Brit Pack. This was episode number 18. If you're still listening to this and you didn't cheat and hit fast forward, thank you for making it all the way through to the end of this week's show. We really do appreciate everyone who listens. And that number is steadily growing, which is really encouraging to hear. You can help us with that as well. Please do. Spread the word, let people know that you're listening to the show, and chime in with your thoughts and views on some of the topics. Say, Simon was talking out of his arse when he said this, or I completely agree with Sandhu when he's talking about this. We love all of that stuff. So, please do get involved. We'll always try and reply whenever we can. You can tweet Sandhu at Sandhu MMA. You can tweet me at Simon Head. And Sandhu's already mentioned the main hub of the show on Twitter is the show's own account, which is at the Brit Pack MMA. The main place to go for all things related to the show is our new website. The BritPackMMA.com is the place to go. You will find blogs. You'll find every show that we've ever published is on there, and a few other bits and pieces on there as well. And when we do get little bits and pieces to announce, or little additional bits of bonus content, you can be sure that they'll live on there as well. You can subscribe through a whole number of ways. The main one, of course, is iTunes. If you're an Apple user or an iTunes user, please do jump on there, hit that subscribe button. It really does help us to do, if you do that. It also helps us loads if you rate us and review us. And if you rate us and review us positively, it helps us even better. So feel free to do that if you get the opportunity. We're also on Stitcher, and we are on Acast as well as SoundCloud. So lots of ways to get the show. And hopefully in the not too distant future, we may be bringing the Brit Pack to YouTube in one form or another. We're looking into a few different bits and pieces with that. So watch this space. We may well start to put some Brit Pack content, whether it's full shows or show segments or bonus additional content. We're looking into a few options, and maybe for 2017 you might start to see the Brit Pack content appearing on YouTube as well. I know some of you have contacted me directly to ask about that. So the plans are afoot and it is coming. So yeah, thank you to everyone for listening. Really do appreciate all your support, and we will speak to you in a week's time. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and we'll be back next week with episode number 19. Speak to you soon.